All right, welcome back, friends. We just got done looking at the question of how do we understand healthcare as a right? Uh, what does that mean? What are the boundaries on it? What constitutes a basic or adequate access to healthcare? And all of this is in lieu of what we would call like universal healthcare or publicly funded healthcare, meaning we take people's taxes from some people and we provide healthcare to other people. And when we talk about providing these services in Antala, we're talking about supporting others, right? Via this and saying we have a right to this. But I want to put a little bit of clarity on this conversation of rights. And we're going to be taking from uh, the Robert Sade argument, which it's a long article, but it's worth seeing because you don't usually see this perspective pushed back on. Uh, and we'll start it in this video and go on to the next video tomorrow. Why don't I have my little tools and stuff? Usually they show me some tools around here. So here I'll read from page 152, the summary of Sade's argument. For Sade, the role of legitimate government is to protect the security of individuals, their property, and their rights to be free from outside interference, making contracts and transacting freely with others. Right? This is Robert Nozick. Role of the government is to stay out of our business and protect our life and our property. The basic rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are what we call natural rights in the sense that they are not derived from or predicated on the operation of any particular social structures, laws, or policies. So if we remember back to like cultural relativism, which said that basically everything is codified based on group agreement. In America, we believe in life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, but we believe that these are like inalienable, right? That like they were true and existed before the government like wrote them down. The government like pulled them out of the natural order from our looking at history. And so that's kind of what they're saying is that life, liberty, pursuit of happiness as natural rights, they don't exist because the government says so. They exist just by evidence of our own existence, our ability to think and interact with each other. So these are natural rights. But they are also negative rights, claims against others that they may not interfere with the legitimate exercise of one's liberty or intrude upon one's enjoyment of one's property or person. They are not positive rights, where these are claims against others to be provided or provisioned with specific goods or services. So, what are positive rights? Otherwise known as welfare rights. Essentially, it says you have a right that requires others to act on your behalf. What does this look like? In America, we have our public education, yeah? And what does public education say? It says, I, by factor of me being a citizen in this community, have a right to have public education provided for my child, aka a school building, accredited teacher, and materials and stuff to teach them, right? Now, even the old people who think the world's overpopulated and don't have kids, they have to pay for some of that schooling via property tax. They don't have a choice in it, right? That's a positive right to education. Uh, Now, a negative or a liberty right says it's a right to act without interference by others. So if you view the right to education as a negative right, that means that you cannot be interfered with your pursuit of educating you and your family. So if you want to teach Scientology or creationism or whatever you believe would best solidify and better your family, your children, you have a right to do that. So you see how this sort of works? It's worth thinking about any rights you think you have: a right to self-defense, a right to property, a right to vote, a right to healthcare. Is it a positive right? Is it a negative right? Are you saying that you have a right to have other people act to provide you with goods and services, right? So let's look at a couple. Right to healthcare. Do we have a right to freely purchase available organs or herbs or drugs, whether or not they're accredited by the FDA or the AMA? Do we have a right to go seek people who are claiming to provide alternative cancer treatments, anti-neoplastins, or super allergy concentrations, or light therapy, or the whole plethora by technically unaccredited people, right? Um, well, the way to think about it is for most of our history in America, we have viewed the right to healthcare as a negative right, meaning that people were free to pursue whatever healthcare they wanted, whether homeopathic or naturopathic or allopathic, without interference by others, but others weren't required to provide it for you. Now, for most of our history, or at least the last 100 years, we have viewed the right to healthcare as a positive right for two groups of people, the poor and the elderly, via Medicaid and Medicare. Yeah? So for a long time, we've already decided that, like, no, it's fair to provide to publicly tax people to provide healthcare for the poor and the elderly. Well, with the Affordable Health Care Act, we were kind of extending that. Like, no, now we say that everybody has a requirement to do this, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how that the idea of the right to health care has kind of expanded from what used to be mostly a negative right for most healthy people, but a positive right for older, elderly, and poor, now is expanding out. So this is pretty straightforward. I don't want to be redundant. Right to non-injury. Does that mean a right to be provided as police force? Or does that mean the right to protect yourself, be free from interference, to protect you and your family with bear traps and secret, moats, fire-breathing moats around the house? Do we have any positive rights? Well, you can think about positive rights are any rights that the government provides, right? Because it's essentially taxing you to provide things for others. So even libertarians thought that the government had a legitimate purpose to police people, to have laws and courts, and defend national borders, right? That those were things necessary in order to preserve your negative rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and the possession of your own property, right? And property was sort of gained via labor, right? That you own your labor and therefore you own the produce of your labor. Um, but how far does that extend? So, so Sade goes on to basically emphasize how wrong he and libertarians view this idea of healthcare as a positive right, and how antithetical they believe it is to just our basic autonomy and freedom and liberty as people to make our own choices, right? And so I'm going to read a little bit from 196, 197. The fundamental flaw in the reasoning of central planners lies in their failure to recognize the distinction between normative and metanormative principles. The right to liberty is not normative. It cannot prescribe what is good for any individual or for society as a whole. The right to liberty, like all natural rights, is metanormative. It alone can ensure the very possibility of human flourishing by protecting self-directedness. The distinction between normative and metanormative is normative is prescribing what you should do. Metanormative is just saying you have a right to prescribe what you should do. I'm not saying this is what you should do, but you have a right to make that choice, to be self-determining, right? Be self-governing, autonomy, something we've talked a lot about in class. In healthcare, the right to liberty protects self-direction in the intelligent balancing of the values and goods associated with health, associated with health with the other values and goods that lead to a flourishing life. It also prevents interference by outside agencies, other individuals, institutions, or governments, in an individual's interactions and transactions with insurance companies, physicians, or other healthcare providers. The difference between liberty rights, which are negative, and positive rights is that the first concerns the process of pursuing things of value, whereas the second concerns the outcomes of those pursuits. Remember Robert Nozick and John Rawls. Robert Nozick was all about the process by which goods were acquired or transferred, right? Was it fair? Was it voluntary, right? Doesn't matter if one person ends up with a lot and the other person ends up with nothing, right? The process that matters, the pursuit of those things. John Rawls was all about the outcome, the time slice, who had what when. And so here, positive rights is to be guaranteed with the product of this or that. For example, in the concept of natural rights, the right to life does not guarantee that we will live long or that we will be healthy. It ensures only that no one will harm us physically without our consent. By contrast, the positive right to life means that we are entitled not only to pursue the goods we need to support our lives, but also to have those goods. That is, to be given them, whether we have earned them or not. Because as the argument goes, we cannot be free, act freely, without them. On page 198, he says, the idea of a positive right to healthcare is contradictory to the principle that every individual is an end in himself who cannot be used without his consent as a means to the ends of others. Right? If you believe everyone is an end in themselves, then to say that we have a positive right to healthcare is to violate that very principle. Because we are ends in ourselves, our lives, liberty, and flourishing are also ends in themselves, and our means to achieve them cannot rightfully be taken from us. Finally, looking at healthcare is a special case. He goes on to say, a common misconception underlying the assertion that healthcare is a social responsibility is the notion that healthcare is a special human need that is categorically different from other basic needs, such as food, clothing, and shelter. Several errors underlie the notion that healthcare is special. And we saw this with the summary of the President's Commission, saying that no, somehow we shouldn't leave this to the open market, right? That somehow it affects just our basic equal opportunity and protection under the law, right? But he says this conflation is misplaced, to put it lightly. Another source of misconception about healthcare as a special human need is an overly narrow understanding of what constitutes health and conflation of the ideas of health and healthcare. When people write and speak of the right to health, they often mean the right to healthcare, but these concepts are not the same. Good health is a consequence of many human activities, such as choosing a proper diet, avoiding dangerous activities, driving too fast, and maintaining fitness by engaging in regular physical exercise. For most individuals, healthcare makes only a minor contribution to health, perhaps excepting some whose chronic diseases require continual medical intervention. Moreover, on this view, the goal of leading a flourishing life requires striving for many other goals: intellectual development, artistic expression, enjoyment of performing arts, athletic achievements, and many others. To achieve the proper balance of these goals, in light of individual talents and preferences, individuals must have the freedom to weigh how to use their limited resources to optimize satisfaction of all their needs and wants. They do this in order to achieve the best possible life for themselves and for those for whom they have chosen to be responsible. Health is an important value, and for most people, healthcare plays only a minor role in achieving health. If you think that we have a right to healthcare, a positive right to healthcare, if health per se were a positive right, health, not healthcare, then all must be entitled to government provision not only of appropriate healthcare, but also climatically suitable clothing and environmentally healthful shelter, but of all other goods that contribute to health, such as a properly balanced diet, exercise facilities to maintain suitable level of physical exercise. Clearly, Said concludes, this is neither feasible nor desirable in a free society. There can be no right to health or healthcare. So he's saying, as a positive right, as an outcome-based right, it's just unreasonable to say that healthcare meets this because healthcare is in no way directly correlated with health. Right? And if we do say we have a positive right to health, then he's saying then it would have to include food, climatically suitable clothing, appropriate shelter, et cetera, organic food all around. And we don't feel that, or maybe you do, I don't know, but that's the natural conclusion. Yeah. So here we've been introduced in summary to the distinction between positive and negative rights. And I just urge you to think about, when you think of what rights people have, whether you consider them positive or negative. Are you saying that you have a right to have other people provide you with that, or that you have a right to pursue that without interference? And one interesting one that I don't know if we'll have time this semester is the right to reproduction. Yeah, right to reproduction, procreation. Do you have a right to reproduction? Well, most of us would say, yeah. If I'm a basic human, I have a right to have offspring, pass on my teachings, my thoughts, my values, my whatever. Uh, do you believe that's a negative right or a positive right? I want you to take a moment and think. If it's a positive right, you're saying I have a right to procreate without interference by others. So if I want to have 10, 15, 20 kids, just a big old family, and teach them creationism, like, that's my right, if it's a negative right. Many other people are like, the world's overpopulated. How dare you? That's so selfish. That's not meant. That would be a negative right. What would it look like as a positive right, as a welfare right? Well, it might be claiming that I have the right to procreation, and therefore I have the right to have you pay for IVF treatment, in vitro fertilization, right? Artificial insemination. People who have difficulty getting pregnant these days because sterility and infertility are at all-time highs. Wonder why. Uh, you might say, if you believe the right to procreation seems pretty fundamental to living life, having kids used to be. We've live in a weird time now. That you have a right to have taxpayers provide you with IVF treatment. Well, does anyone know how expensive IVF treatment is? Pretty expensive, $30,000, $40,000 still, I think. Right? It's a lot. Uh, if you believe it's a positive right, then yeah, you might think I should have that taxpayer funded. I believe in Wisconsin we don't, but Illinois we do. I knew a student who went down there and had it at least partially uh, paid for by insurance. But if you believe it's a positive right that they shouldn't, then you might say the government does have justification now to control how many children you have, how you raise them. If we're saying that no, you have a right to procreation to have children, taxpayer funded, but taxpayer supervised, right? So it's kind of a double edged sword, and you can see why libertarians feel like any positive right is a direct infringement upon their basic, liberty, pursue whatever they want without infringement of others. So I will see you next time for the second half of Said's argument, where he looks about at why the costs of healthcare are the way they are and what we can do about it.